being a lesbian has so many positives for me and is so amazing for me in so many ways, and so many other trans women.
I know that you're not going to like hearing this, but abortion is also a men's issue and a trans issue.
But I feel like a lot of lesbianism being tied around what parts you have down there is weird.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad Polumbo, and welcome back to the Damage Control podcast, where we're reclaiming the LGBT community from the extreme far left and far right perspectives that are dominating the debate over these issues. If you're new here, do consider subscribing if you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple or Spotify, and don't forget to like and comment with your thoughts as we go along. Today, we're talking about a recent tragedy that's unfortunately been rather grotesquely politicized, as well as trans athlete insanity reaching an absolute peak, and perhaps the craziest woke pronoun cancellation story I've ever heard. Plus, as always, I'll round out the show reacting to some wild LGBT TikToks and suffering for your entertainment. Now buckle up and let's get into it. So up first, we've got a really somber subject, as a 16-year-old teenager who identified as non-binary died this week after an altercation that happened at school, and this story quickly went viral. But just first, here's some local news coverage that describes the original reports after the incident.
An Oklahoma teen born here in El Paso died after being severely beaten inside a school bathroom. 16-year-old sophomore Nex Benedict, who went by the name Nex, identified as non-binary and used they/them pronouns. Next, a day after the alleged attack took place, where they and another classmate who also identified as non-binary were beaten for an extended period before a school staffer broke off the fight. According to reports, Next suffered a deadly head injury as well as bruising and cuts across their face. The cause of the confrontation remains under investigation, but the victim's mother says they were constantly bullied in school.
So as you just heard from that news broadcast, Nex Benedict, a 16-year-old, died one day after a violent altercation in a high school bathroom. This is such a sad story, and my heart goes out to Nex's family and the community and the extreme sense of loss they must be feeling, because to lose someone with such a bright future and a loved one, I've never experienced anything like it, and my heart just breaks for them. I really wish that we weren't talking about this story and that it was just a local thing that they were dealing with and their families, but it's unfortunately been politicized and taken to the national level in a really, really toxic and disingenuous and inappropriate way. Before almost any of the facts about what happened were even in, LGBT activists, both online and at the grassroots level, quickly politicized Nex's death and used it to attack their ideological enemies. Here are a couple samples of some TikTokers, including Jeffrey Marsh in the first video, doing exactly that, and pretty explicitly blaming Nex's death on right-wing, transphobic people or people with different opinions on these issues, and most specifically on the right-wing Twitter account Libs of TikTok, which pushes back on LGBT teachers and activists and posts clips and videos and stories about these issues. So take a listen to some of the tenor of the TikTok conversation after Nex's death.
The woman who runs the bullying internet account Libs of TikTok was given a spot on the Oklahoma Library Board, the statewide board. She is not from Oklahoma. The reason I bring this up is because these gestures, these far-right attacks, these elevations of anti-trans folks have deadly consequences. I'm sure you've heard by now the story of the non-binary student in that state who was bullied to death. Please hug a non-binary person today.
Far-right Republican rhetoric contributed to the beating death of a 16-year-old student in Oklahoma. Just a few weeks ago, Ryan Waters, the superintendent of schools in Oklahoma, added the creator of Libs of TikTok to the school library board. And it was too much even for the people of Oklahoma. There was no benefit to putting a woman from California who has no children in the Oklahoma school system on the school board when the entire ethos of her social media account is to attack, dehumanize, criticize, and dox queer people. And that hateful rhetoric and dehumanizing of queer people, coupled with the broad attacks on trans children, resulted in the death of a child. This here is Nex Benedict. They were a straight A student who lived with their grandma, loved to draw, and loved animals. And 3 older girls in the high school beat them to death on the floor of the girls' bathroom.
It wasn't just online discourse that took this tenor, but it was actually most of the mainstream media coverage as well. So The Independent reported, here's their headline, Oklahoma banned trans students from bathrooms. Now a bullied student is dead after a fight. The implication here is pretty clear. This student died, and it's directly related to Republican policies on transgender issues. In the body of the article, they quote activists who very explicitly blame this tragic death on Chaya Raichik, the owner and creator and person who runs the Libs of TikTok Twitter account. This is from the Independent story. Freedom Oklahoma, an LGBTQ advocacy group, blamed Oklahoman lawmakers and Ms. Raichik for promoting bigotry and intolerance towards trans students after Nex's death. The group said that Ms. Raichik continues to use her platform in a way that leads others to threaten real harm at Oklahoma kids. The group wrote, "We want to be clear, whether Nex died as a direct result of injuries sustained in the brutal hate-motivated attack at school or not, Nex's death is the result of being the target of physical and emotional harm because of who Nex was." Now, if you're wondering how this tragic death is in any way related to Libs of TikTok, it's a perfectly fair question. I'll try my best to answer it, but there's really not a lot to work with, because whatever connection exists is incredibly tenuous. So these critics, for example, are pointing to the fact that nearly 2 years ago, Libs of TikTok posted a video featuring a teacher from Nex's school saying, parents, your parents, basically was what the video explicitly said, if they don't accept you or agree with you. And then that teacher was let go after Libs of TikTok called to light this public video of a teacher saying parents, basically. Shocker, that teacher was let go. As far as I can tell, that is the only connection whatsoever between Libs of TikTok and the school where this student went to and experienced this attack. Some other involvement is that about a month ago, the state of Oklahoma Republican officials appointed the Libs of TikTok creator, Chaya, to some sort of board position on what will be in school libraries, which I do find kind of ridiculous because the Libs of TikTok creator doesn't live in Oklahoma or have any qualifications relevant to that kind of thing, but it's really a pretty tenuous connection as well. That's it. That's all they've got to tie this individual's death to this Twitter account. And this was all before we knew, even factually, what Nex's cause of death was, whether it was related to the violent incident in the bathroom the day before, and whether that violent incident was even hate-related, whether it was even people bullying or beating up Nex because they identified as non-binary. All of those things were still being figured out and hadn't been confirmed when these people made these accusations and the media ran with them. That's pretty crazy, pretty reckless and irresponsible. Shockingly, it hasn't aged very well. Here's an update from the police after investigating the matter further.
Tonight, police in Oklahoma releasing preliminary autopsy findings in the death of a non-binary teen who died after a fight at school. 16-year-old Nex Benedict dying at the hospital on February 8th, according to police, one day after they were involved in a fight at the Owasso High School West campus just outside of Tulsa. A school Nex's mother told The Independent where the teen was bullied for their gender identity. Owasso police now saying the medical examiner has determined Nex did not die as a result of trauma and that the cause of death is pending until toxicology results and other tests come in.
So it does sound like Nex was bullied for being non-binary at school, and that's horrible. That's not something anyone should support or be okay with in any way. But we now know that according to the police, this student's death wasn't actually related to the bullying incident that had happened the day before. So, are any of these people going to retract their statements that this was a hate crime murder? Don't hold your breath, guys. Don't hold your breath. But more importantly, I really want to point out that even if Nex had been killed in an anti-trans hate crime or an anti-non-binary hate crime, that would be horrific. That would be really, truly terrible beyond words. But it still wouldn't actually be Libs of TikTok's fault. I mean, it's just an insane stretch. Even if you disagree with some of what Libs of TikTok has to say, and I certainly do, they've taken positions I totally disagree with and find reprehensible, like suggesting that openly gay teachers should be fired. And I also think Libs of TikTok sometimes mischaracterizes the videos they post. And as a recovering journalist, I really don't like that. But regardless, no matter what you think of this Twitter account and this woman that runs it, it's just not true. It's just a ridiculous smear and an insane logical leap to say that they were responsible for this child's death. I mean, the responsibility for a crime always lies 100% with the person who committed it. If you try to blame other people whose words are out there and have used charged rhetoric, you're actually taking blame off of the shoulders of the perpetuator to put it onto someone else. You're literally letting the killer off the hook for the responsibility for their own actions so you can blame and scapegoat one of your political opponents. Sorry, but that's disgusting to me. I want to give you guys an example of how I'd apply this logic to the other side. A few years ago, a deranged left-wing person went to training practice for the Republicans involved in the annual congressional baseball game and tried to assassinate multiple Republican members of Congress. This person was a Bernie Sanders supporter, and Bernie Sanders had, around that time, been railing against Republicans in some of the most extreme terms imaginable, arguing that they were going to get people killed and were trying to take away health care that people needed to survive. Highly charged rhetoric. I don't, at all, blame Bernie Sanders for the actions of that deranged individual who tried to kill Rand Paul, Steve Scalise, and other Republican lawmakers. That person alone is to blame for what they chose to do, because they're a human being with agency, and they made the choice to do what they tried to do. Bernie never openly called for violence, and even if he used charged rhetoric, it's not ultimately his responsibility how other people, of the millions and millions of people that his message reaches, how they choose to respond to it. It's theirs. And while I think it's fair game to criticize Libs of TikTok, I apply the same logic to her as well. And I have to be honest, I think there's something of a sinister motivation at play here as well. The kind of people, like the journalist Taylor Lorenz, who are leading the scapegoating of Libs of TikTok for this and other crimes, well, they're the type that really want big tech platforms like X, formerly known as Twitter, to censor and shut down Libs of TikTok. And if they simply argued that Libs of TikTok is bad or mean or wrong, nobody would really accept that as a reason they must be deplatformed or censored or silenced. Because Americans, by and large, still kind of have a live and let live, free speech ethos in our culture. But these activists know that if they can successfully pressure advertisers and frame what Libs of TikTok is doing as endangering people's physical safety, they might just be able to get her deplatformed and silenced. I view this as deeply sinister. You're essentially exploiting tragedies and weaponizing them against your political opponents, all to try to silence them rather than actually argue with them and explain why they're wrong. I find it contemptible, I find it reprehensible, and I really wish we weren't even talking about this story at all, except to mourn the loss of life and send our best wishes to the family. But here's the toxic, absolutely toxic state of things in 2024. All right, up next, has trans athlete insanity finally peaked? We've got to talk about a really crazy, really disturbing story and video because a girls' high school basketball team has forfeited a game at halftime after a player was injured by a male or student who identifies as a transgender girl on the other team. We'll roll the video from this incident while we discuss some of the details, but it's kind of disturbing. So if you don't want to see it, look away now. But Fox News reports that a high school basketball player who identifies as a girl is accused of causing injuries in a game, causing opponents to forfeit. So a girls' basketball game between two Massachusetts schools made waves earlier this month after one team forfeited against their opponent, which had a biological male who identifies as female on the court, a source told Fox News Digital. The Collegiate Charter School of Lowell forfeited against KIPP Academy, which resides in Lynn, Massachusetts, at halftime. KIPP was leading the game 31-14, but the game goes into the record as a 10-0 win. A video circulated online on Monday showing one player for the Collegiate Charter wrestling for a rebound with the biological male athlete from KIPP Academy. Some have expressed concern after the girl for collegiate charter was injured on the play after hitting the court, grabbing her back in pain. A source told Fox News Digital that the biological male who identifies as a female is more than 6 feet tall and has facial hair. KIPP Academy did not immediately answer a request for clarification regarding the athlete's gender identity. Prior to this injury, 2 others had been suffered by a collegiate charter team that was only carrying an 8-player bench due to injuries in previous games, but it is unknown if these injuries occurred during plays involving the biological male athlete. So this school decided to forfeit, and I totally understand why, but both Massachusetts state law and the handbook for the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association both require that sports allow athletes to participate according to their gender identity, not biological sex. Yeah, this incident shows why that is pure and utter madness. It's not just about fairness, like we've talked about in other contexts, like swimming, where a trans girl student will still have biological advantages if they went through male puberty, especially, that don't go away just because you're medically transitioning, which means it's not fair for female athletes to have to compete with biologically male athletes who have a natural advantage. That's why we segregate sports by sex. If we didn't, in most sports, males would just dominate. But we've decided as a society that sports have a unique and important value in teaching competitiveness and teamwork and other things, and are a rewarding life experience that we want to ensure women get to experience too, which they couldn't do without sports being segregated by sex. Yet this incident shows another important reason why, at least in contact sports, you absolutely should. It's both necessary and proper and fair and not discriminatory, but just simply rational to separate sports by birth sex. I played basketball in high school, and while contact's going out of the game a little bit, it is physical. And what happened in the play they showed on video was just a rebound. It's not like, from anything we can tell, this trans student was trying to hurt anyone. I really don't think that was the case. They were just both pulling at the basketball, and the male student was just much stronger than the girl. So he ripped the ball away, or she ripped the ball away, the trans student, from the student they were competing with, and that student went flying and got hurt. It's not safe. And there's no justification based in inclusion or wokeness or identity that ever can justify jeopardizing female athletes' safety. I'm sorry. It's just not that important to affirm gender identity above safety. It's just not. I understand that teenagers who identify as transgender, they want to play sports too. I really do feel for them if they're going to be excluded as a result of this, but you have to have safety is the starting block for sports, and then you go on from there. You can't compromise that for anything else. And it's just not safe. This is just one incident of many, but it's not safe to have biologically male students competing with biologically female students in contact sports. This isn't chess or bowling or something where you can make an argument that it's actually fine, or even something like swimming or track where it might be unfair, but at least nobody's going to be hurt. Putting males and females together in contact sports is dangerous. And I know I say this a lot, guys, but this is only going to set back acceptance and dignity that we want people to afford the transgender community. Honestly, I'm surprised a fight didn't break out at this game, or that dads didn't storm the court, because it is really disturbing to watch a male student just overpower a female student and that she gets thrown to the ground. Not a recipe for success in terms of promoting inclusion and tolerance and everyone living side by side. No, this kind of insanity, if they stick with it, is only going to lead to a huge groundswell of opposition towards any form of inclusion for trans students, which is not what I think is the right path, but is an understandable reaction to really crazy stuff like this. Let me know what you think in the comments. How did you feel when you saw this really shocking video? And do you think that this is going to keep happening, or are people finally going to wake up and realize that this is just, even if you're liberal, this is just taking it too far? Up next, this is one of the craziest examples of woke insanity I've ever seen. The Daily Mail reports that an elderly California woman aged 90 was fired from her volunteering position of 60 years at an MS nonprofit because she did not understand pronouns despite previously winning multiple awards. The woman, named Fran Itkoff, age 90, says she was forced to step down from the National Multiple Sclerosis Society because she did not understand what pronouns meant. Itkoff had volunteered for the nonprofit support group for multiple sclerosis patients for 60 years. An email from the group accused her of violating the MS Society's diversity, equity, and inclusion guidelines. Here's a clip from an interview with Libs of TikTok that this woman did, where she explains what happens and how what sounds like just basic confusion about a pronoun thing that was unfamiliar to her led to a really drastic and radical response of pushing her out of the organization entirely. Take a listen.
My husband had MS, and to keep busy, he took over this Long Beach Lakewood MS support group. And I helped him, of course, all the time. And when he passed away, which is 20 years ago, I decided to keep the group going because everyone wanted to continue it.
How many years were you involved with the MS Society?
About 60 years.
6D with the zero.
60. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
My husband, and then I took over, I kept it going, and when he passed away.
So your husband was running this organization to help and support MS patients, and you were in volunteer with the MS Society. You've been doing this for 60 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you took over when your husband passed away. And then recently you had some kind of interaction with a representative from the MS Society where she asked you to use your pronouns. So when she first asked you that, I mean, what was your reaction? What was your response?
I was confused. I didn't know what it was, what it meant. And I'd seen it on a couple of letters that had come in after the person's name. They had the pronouns, but I didn't know what that meant. And so finally, when I was talking to her, I thought, I'll ask, what does it mean? And, let her tell me. And so she said that meant that they were all inclusive, which didn't make sense to me because it sounds like you're labeling for females and not males if you're just putting in she, her.
She said that she was just asking her what it meant to have a conversation. So as a 90-year-old who didn't know what it meant, she's not street savvy to find out what it meant.
Yeah.
And when she said that they were required to use it to be inclusive, and my mom was saying that we've always been, the MS Society as a whole and the Long Beach group has just always been inclusive.
A few days later, it was on a Friday at 4:58?
At 4:58, which we thought was odd, but anyway.
At the end of the day, end of the week, I got an email from her saying that they were sorry, but they had to ask me to step down as a volunteer for the MS Society.
And the reason being is that you're not inclusive enough.
The verbiage she said was that she didn't abide by their diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they have to ask her to step down, and she's can't be a part of the MS Society as a volunteer, which to me is ironic because they're saying they're being inclusive, but yet they're excluding a 90-year-old disabled woman who volunteers for over 60 years, and literally the sole purpose is to help the MS patients and find a cure. And
that's what we're there for.
Keep helping with volunteering as much as she can, which has literally been her whole life. That's literally all she does. So
So this story is really crazy, but the crazy part is that the organization initially stood by it despite all the public outrage. More reporting from the Daily Mail says here that the organization came under fire and was accused of ageism, but doubled down amid the backlash, saying its staff acted with the best of intentions. Recently, a volunteer, Fran Itkoff, was asked to step away from her role because of statements that were viewed as not aligning with our policy of inclusion. the nonprofit said on Thursday in a statement. Fran has been a valued member of our volunteer team for more than 60 years. We believe that our staff acted with the best of intentions and did their best to navigate a challenging issue. As an organization, we are in continued conversation about assuring that our diversity, equity, and inclusion policies evolve in service of our mission, and we will reach out to Fran in service of this goal. When I saw that they were sticking to this, man, I thought I was being pranked. Like, this sounds like a Babylon Bee headline, a parody headline, that a 90-year-old woman was kicked out of an organization, a charitable organization, that her husband had suffered the disease. She'd volunteered there for 60 years, and they booted her because she didn't understand pronouns in your email signature. What? How is that open to diversity and inclusion? What you're literally doing is excluding someone from an older generation because they don't quite understand new concepts they're not familiar with. Thankfully, now they have actually apologized and reversed course. More reporting from the Daily Mail, who was really all over this story here. They said, recently, we asked Fran to step down from her role as a group leader because of statements made that we viewed as not aligning with our recently implemented diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. The statement read, "We realize now that we made a mistake and we should have had more conversations with Fran before making this decision. We apologized to Fran directly and reached out to her to find a way to continue the work together." So this initial story just struck me as a really grotesque injustice. It demonstrated just how extremely woke people, the kind of people that apparently run these nonprofits, just lack any sort of empathy or understanding for different people from different walks of life or times. It's also just more proof of how the woke mindset just demands conformity and has to exile anybody who questions things or isn't 100% aligned. On one hand, I am glad that they reversed course, but I'm pretty skeptical that it was any sort of genuine reversal, and I more so just think it was because they got so much public backlash and scrutiny. I don't think they ever apologize or reverse course if this story doesn't go absolutely gangbusters viral. And unfortunately, people with this kind of intolerant, woke mindset run many of our institutions and nonprofits and businesses and schools and other things these days. I'm sure incidents that are kind of similar to this are happening all the time and will happen many times, but never get spotlighted or get the same swell of public support or outrage, and will never be corrected, and the injustice will never be righted. All this, just to me, is another reminder of the perversity of the DEI movement, the diversity, equity, and inclusion activism that's become so popular in so much of corporate America and so many other walks of American life. It claims to be about inclusion, but in practice it's most often about inculcating and perpetuating a left-wing ideology and crushing anyone who dissents, even if that means being remarkably uninclusive. It's also just bizarre and unethical that an MS charity, a charity that's supposed to support people who struggle with a disease, would prioritize political ideology and social justice activism over its actual mission of helping people affected by an illness. All right, guys, it's time for everybody's favorite part of the podcast, where I react to some insane LGBT TikToks from the perspective of a center-right gay man. Buckle up and get ready to lose some brain cells with me.
Now, being a lesbian is much like being trans at the core of my identity. It is a big part of who I am and how I identify, and intertwines so much with my beliefs, morals, and like how I live my life. And being a lesbian has so many positives for me and is so amazing for me in so many ways. And so many other trans women, it's also amazing. And even other trans masculine and trans men people, it's amazing. Lesbian love is supposed to be very, very inclusive. And pretty much the only rule about lesbian love is that it does not include cis men. So a common misconception about lesbians is that it's just woman on woman. But you can also be non-binary and be a lesbian. And like I said, you can also be transmasculine and be a lesbian. Lesbian relationships are just so special. So good. I swear to God, there's nothing like it.
So if these folks get their way, I mean, the word lesbian, it's just going to lose all meaning. Also, being gay or being lesbian really shouldn't be that big a part of who you are, of your personality. Like, it's not insignificant. It definitely determines things about you and about your life and who you will have as a partner and build a family with, and that is definitely not insignificant. But it really doesn't count as a personality, and I don't really see how it would totally inform your worldview or your morals or your values as if you're not an individual. You're still going to need to have a personality beyond the box you check on the census, babe. And I'm going to have to check you on this statement that trans masculine people or trans men can be lesbians. The only way that's true is if you're saying they're not actually men and they're just women, which I don't think you're saying, because you don't get to redefine lesbianism. No, not after it was fought so hard for it to be accepted and normalized. You don't get to redefine it. It's not non-men who love non-men or whatever sexist, reductive nonsense you just popped off about. It is women who love other women. So either trans men are men, or they're lesbians. But y'all really can't have this one both ways. At least, not if your goal is to make any sense. And no, you cannot be a non-binary lesbian, primarily because non-binary isn't a real or legitimate concept, but also because if you identify as non-binary, you're explicitly saying that you don't identify as a woman. So how could you possibly be a woman who loves other women? The math isn't mathing, Cupcake. I honestly feel bad for my lesbian supporters and followers because it feels like your identity is under attack from within the LGBT community. These people really need to stop because they're not helping. Up next, this trans lesbian says other lesbians make them feel unsafe.
But I feel like a lot of lesbianism being tied around what parts you have down there is weird. I see many jokes from specifically cis lesbians who say being a lesbian is about not wanting you know what, right? I can't say it on here. But like they'll make that the entire personality around lesbianism. I'm a trans lesbian who has not had bottom surgery. And I'm not insecure. I'm not insecure about the parts that I have down there. But I do feel unsafe when I go into lesbian spaces, like a lesbian bar, because there's certain people who still believe in the whole ideology of clocking and being clocked. And it's just weird, right? It's just weird. Personally, I don't trust it when people use the assigned gender at birth outside of its appropriate context. So when I see like lesbian bars or like lesbian oriented things that are AFAB only, it makes me feel a little unsafe, a little weird.
There's a lot to unpack there. Firstly, there's nothing wrong with lesbians basing their identity in part on the basis that they're not attracted to biological male genitalia. Because for years they were pressured by society and by their family and probably from within to try to be attracted to biological males and just fit in and just get along and just have the life they were supposed to have, and they couldn't. It didn't work. And that's okay. They're okay and acceptable just the way they are. And that way is fundamentally not attracted to biological males. But now you're telling them that actually that's not okay, attacking the basis and core of their identity from the far left instead of the far right this time. But it's still an attack and not acceptable. Look, I'm sure there's plenty of people who would be happy to date this person. So stop trying to force lesbians to be into you and to be into biological males. It's never gonna happen. It's not gonna work. And it's kind of creepy. Also, I hate this language about being unsafe. Like, give me a break. Even if you are made to feel unwelcome, you're not physically unsafe. The conflations between emotions and physical safety is one of the most disturbing and widespread things that I constantly see in these woke TikToks. Hurt feelings are not, in fact, equivalent to a punch to the face. And only somebody who's lived a punch-free life of relative privilege could ever seriously think otherwise. Up next, abortion is now a trans issue because words have no meaning.
I know that you're not going to like hearing this, but abortion is also a men's issue and a trans issue. We are at the 1-year anniversary of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, and I think folks still don't know that abortion is an intersectional issue. Abortion is a trans issue not just because trans people get abortions, but because trans rights and abortion rights boil down to the same thing, which is government control and what you and I do with our bodies. As uncomfortable as it may be to hear, abortion is also a men's issue because trans men have abortion, trans masks have abortions, and we need cis men who don't have the capacity for pregnancy to be fighting for abortion rights. Roe v. Wade was overturned a year ago by a Supreme Court majority that, for the most part, does not have the capacity for pregnancy, and we can't have that happen again. Planned Parenthood currently has a petition to expand the Supreme Court and for transparency requirements around the justices. You can sign it at ppfa.org/reform. Abortion rights activists have long said that people without the capacity for pregnancy, like me, need to be vocal allies in this because we need to be sharing in the labor. And as long as I have this platform, I will be fervently pro-abortion because I am pro a life-saving procedure and pro your right to your bodily autonomy. Our fight is far from over, and my place is fighting alongside you for your bodily autonomy and for mine. The sooner we begin working together, the more effective I think we'll be.
Babe, it's giving incoherent. I'm honestly kind of confused because for years I was told by liberals and progressives that when it comes to the debate over abortion, no uterus, no opinion. But now progressive trans activists are saying that actually biological males can have an opinion on abortion, but not just that, but that it's actually intrinsically issue tied to their identity and rights. Which is it? To be clear, I actually reject the no uterus, no opinion logic and find it fundamentally undemocratic. And while I don't want to get into the whole substance of the abortion debate, I know lots of my followers fall on either side, and I think good people can disagree about this complicated issue. I will just say that if one does believe abortion is the ending of an innocent human life, then it only makes sense that if one holds that belief, they would want to see abortion legally prohibited, regardless of whether they have a uterus or regardless of whether they're a man or a woman. It's just the same way they would want to see murder outlawed in their view. Anyway, I just don't agree at all that abortion is a trans issue or an LGBT issue. The two seem pretty much unrelated to me, honestly. I'm not seeing the connection here. Abortion is a really complicated issue with compelling intellectual and moral arguments on either side of the debate. And I think any gay or trans person, who are ultimately all individuals, could look at that debate and land on either side. This whole conflating everything with everything is just part of a broader rhetorical creep I've witnessed that I really don't like, where they call everything an LGBT rights issue or an immigrants issue or whatever. I mean, one of the biggest LGBT rights groups, the Human Rights Campaign, they actually mark lawmakers as anti-LGBT if they vote against immigration. And their logic is that some immigrants are LGBT. Like, if we're just conflating everything with everything, then these words have no meaning anymore. When everything is an LGBT issue, that designation starts to lose any real significance or meaning and stops being compelling whatsoever. You might not realize it, but you're unintentionally or intentionally neutering the rhetorical force of your own arguments. Other than that, though, you're doing great, sweetie. Alright, guys, I can't really handle any more of these LGBT TikToks in one sitting without incurring permanent brain damage. If you're still here, you must have found something interesting or insightful about this video and this podcast, so please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and maybe even turning on those bell notifications. Oh, and don't forget to like and comment with your thoughts. Now, I'll see you all next week, but if you're not sick of my content yet, you can go here or here to check out more of my videos you might just enjoy.